Welcome to the Deep Dives. Today, we're doing a strategic analysis of a really foundational challenge for Nepal's economy.
Right.
We're moving past the usual talk about trade deficits and infrastructure to focus on, well, the actual dirt beneath our feet.
It sounds simple, but it's everything.
It is. For decades, the entire national agricultural strategy has focused on what grows above the ground. Paddy, maize, wheat.
And almost completely neglected the foundational asset, the non-renewable one, the soil itself.
Exactly.
And that strategic oversight, well, it's become what is probably the country's single largest economic vulnerability.
That biggest statement.
Absolutely. We are now servicing a huge liability, a mounting one that we call soil debt. And the interest payments on that debt are becoming, frankly, catastrophic to national reserves.
So we're talking about real money here.
Oh, yes. The fertilizer import bills, for instance. In the fiscal year 2020-2023, they soared past an alarming 30 billion NPR.
30 billion, that's a huge drain on foreign currency.
A critical drain. And it leads to fragile yields that are totally exposed by erratic monsoons, threatening the livelihoods of nearly 2/3 of the population.
So when we look at the source material for this deep dive, the mission is pretty clear. Regenerative agriculture isn't some, environmental feel-good story.
Not at all.
It's a direct, hard-nosed investment strategy. It's for de-risking the entire agricultural sector and, maybe most importantly, breaking Nepal's structural dependency on these volatile global fertilizer markets.
Precisely. But the conversation, it has to shift. It needs to move from just mitigating risk to seizing an opportunity.
Okay, what's the opportunity?
The analysis identifies the most significant untapped financial asset in Nepali agriculture as simply carbon.
Carbon.
Yes. By systematically adopting these regenerative practices, farmers can literally transform their degraded soil into a quantifiable, measurable carbon sink. And that opens up a completely new, multi-million-dollar revenue stream through the global offset markets.
That is a fascinating way to frame it, turning a health deficit in the land into a globally traded commodity. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
I think we have to start by detailing the liability side of the ledger, this crumbling foundation, this soil debt.
And we can trace that liability straight back to the Green Revolution era policies.
Right.
The focus then was all on synthetic NPK fertilizers. And look, they delivered immediate short-term yield boosts, no question.
Of course.
But it was essentially a process of liquidating Nepal's natural capital, the health of its soil. It was like maximizing your quarterly profit by selling off your most essential factory equipment.
And the most important piece of that equipment being the soil organic matter, or SO. We should be specific here. SOM is that dark, living, carbon-based engine in the soil.
It's the engine. It provides the structure, it holds the water, it sustains the nutrient cycle, everything.
And it's what we've lost.
Exactly. Decades of heavy tilling and chemical application have just destroyed this vital carbon-based asset. It oxidized it, released it back into the atmosphere. The data on this is, well, it's alarming.
Because it puts a real number on the collapse.
It really does. Studies show that soils in the big farming regions, the Terai and the mid-hills, now have average SOM levels below 1%.
Below 1%. And for agronomists, that's a magic number, isn't it?
It's the critical threshold. Below that, the soil ecosystem fundamentally loses its ability to function as an engine. It just stops working.
And that failure leads directly to the economic problem.
Right.
To those massive import bills.
It's the core of the inefficiency. When the SOM collapses, the soil loses its ability to hold on to anything. It's a concept called cation exchange capacity, or CEC.
The CEC.
Right. So if you think of healthy soil as a fully charged battery that holds nutrients, degraded soil with low SOM is it's like a battery with a massive short circuit. It has an incredibly low CEC.
Meaning it can't hold the nutrients you put in.
It can't bind and store them. Things like potassium, magnesium, and crucially the nitrogen from urea. It just washes away.
So just to be clear, if the government spent 30 billion NPR importing fertilizer last year, how much of that was essentially wasted because of low CEC?
The vast majority of it. A farmer pays for, say, 100 kilograms of expensive imported urea.
Right.
But because the soil lacks the organic matter to hold that nutrient, maybe only 20 or 30 kilograms are actually available to the plant before the rest just leaches away.
So they're stuck.
They're trapped in a cycle of diminishing returns, forced to apply more and more chemicals just to tread water, which ensures that import bill just keeps climbing.
And this crumbling foundation, it also acts as a climate vulnerability multiplier. It seems like the devastating climate impacts we see are maybe less about the weather itself.
And more about the land's inability to cope with it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Healthy soil, rich in SO, it acts like a massive sponge.
Right.
Regenerative land can hold up to 20 times more water than depleted soil.
20 times.
So when that resilience is gone, the soil can't absorb heavy monsoon rains. That leads to rapid runoff, topsoil erosion on the terraces, and it magnifies downstream flooding and landslides.
And then in the dry season.
The lack of that sponge effect means the soil can't supply any stored moisture. So typical dry spells turn into widespread drought-induced crop failures.
So our poor soil management is artificially inflating the entire risk profile of Nepali agriculture.
That is the direct consequence of decades of ignoring the asset right beneath our feet.
So if the Green Revolution created this enormous economic liability, regenerative agriculture is the mechanism for turning that liability back into an appreciating asset.
Exactly. But it requires a fundamental mental shift. You have to move away from constantly feeding the plant with external things.
To empowering the soil to feed the plant internally.
Yes. It's about systemic redesign, rebuilding the soil's own self-regulating systems. And this isn't just theory. These practices have direct, quantifiable economic benefits for the smallholder farmer.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's pivot now to the tangible mechanisms, the things that drive this financial turnaround. The first principle is minimal soil disturbance, no-till farming.
From an economic standpoint, conventional plowing is a huge expense. You have fuel, labor, machinery, wear and tear.
It all adds up.
Transitioning to no-till immediately slashes those operational costs. Now, there is a point of friction here. Many smallholders in Nepal, they worry that crop residue will interfere with planting or, harbor pests.
So the key isn't just to stop plowing altogether.
No, it's about adopting practices like better residue management, targeted, reduced tillage only when you absolutely need it.
And strategically, what does that do?
It allows the soil structure to rebuild itself. The immediate reward is lower costs. The long-term benefit is drastically reduced erosion and runoff, which is just critical for farmers on those steep mid-hill terraces.
Keeping that topsoil on the farm is the definition of asset protection.
Long-term asset protection, exactly.
Okay, second principle, keeping the soil covered, cover cropping.
We call this green armor, and it's pure asset enhancement. When a field is left bare, the land is depreciating. It's losing moisture, it's losing carbon, it's open to erosion.
Right.
But planting non-cash crops, things like millet, buckwheat, certain clovers, that continuously feeds the soil microbiome with carbon.
And this must directly tackle some of those input costs.
Oh, yes. The cover crop acts as natural weed suppression, so you need less expensive herbicide. And for those terraces in the mid-hills, a good cover crop physically slows down rain runoff, allowing it to soak in. It virtually eliminates catastrophic topsoil loss.
So you're not just stopping the land's depreciation.
You're actively appreciating its value by building that crucial SO.
Okay, the third principle, increasing biodiversity through crop rotation and intercropping. This seems to be the one that most directly hits that fertilizer import crisis.
Absolutely vital. Monoculture creates fragility, it creates dependency. But when farmers strategically plant legumes,
Like lentils, soybeans.
soybeans, chickpeas, yes. When they plant those alongside or in rotation with their stable crops, they are effectively insourcing a key fertilizer input that the country currently spends billions to import.
How does that insourcing mechanism actually work?
Legumes have these symbiotic bacteria in their roots. They pull free abundant nitrogen right out of the atmosphere and convert it into plant-available fertilizer in the soil.
So it's a direct biological substitute for synthetic urea.
It is. By rotating crops, the farmer lets the legumes deposit the fertilizer, which then feeds the next crop, the maize or the paddy. This instantly helps the farmer decouple their farm's profitability from these volatile geopolitical supply chains. It reduces that 30 billion rupee burden.
And finally, the fourth principle, integrating livestock. This actually feels quite traditional for the smallholder model in Nepal. So what went wrong? Why did that system break down?
It broke down because of the Green Revolution's reliance on chemicals. Once you start depending on synthetic NPK, the value of manure just declines because the soil biome that processes the manure, it's been compromised.
It's been killed off.
It has. The regenerative approach brings it back and optimizes that traditional model. It transforms animal waste, which is otherwise a disposal problem, into the most bioavailable form of fertilizer there is.
So it closes the nutrient loop. The cow eats the cover crop, produces manure, the manure seeds the soil, And the healthier soil then feeds the cash crop.
Exactly. It turns a cost center into a value-creating, resource-efficient loop. And when you put all four of these mechanisms together,
No-till, cover crops, diversity of livestock.
you create the engine that pumps atmospheric CO2 into the soil, storing it as measurable SOM. And that, right there, is the foundation for monetizing the health of the land.
Which brings us to carbon farming. This is where the farmer becomes a supplier for a massive global market.
Right. Carbon farming is the opportunity to transform soil into a new, globally traded asset class. It positions Nepali farmers as key suppliers in the voluntary carbon offset market, which is projected to reach over $250 billion by 2030.
That is not a niche market.
It is a huge supply opportunity.
So how does the business model actually translate into real revenue for a smallholder farmer?
The mechanism is all about quantification. A measured, verifiable increase of 1 ton of CO2 equivalent that's sequestered and stored in the soil gets certified as 1 carbon credit.
Okay.
Those credits are then purchased by multinational corporations, airlines, tech companies, banks who need to offset their own unavoidable global emissions.
And the key part is that the money from that sale flows back to the farmers.
Directly back to the farmers.
Let's talk about the financial impact, because that's what's going to drive adoption.
Conservative estimates suggest a well-managed regenerative hectare in Nepal could sequester somewhere between 1 to 3 tons of CO2e per year.
1 to 3 tons.
And at let's say, a modest market price of $20 per ton, that's an additional 2,600 to 7,800 NPR annually per hectare.
Which, on its own, isn't a massive amount of money.
It's not massive, but for a typical smallholder, it's a substantial and, more importantly, a reliable new income stream. It could be a 15 to 20% increase in their net income.
Earned for doing something that makes their land more productive anyway.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
But the scaling problem is always the issue in Nepal. It's a country of highly fragmented small land holdings. How do you possibly aggregate tens of thousands of tiny farms into one bankable carbon project?
That is where Nepal has a unique and powerful institutional advantage.
Which is?
The country already has decades of experience with highly effective grassroots institutions, the longstanding community forestry user groups, the CFUGs, and very strong agricultural cooperatives.
Right, those are already in place.
They provide the perfect institutional vehicle. They can aggregate tens of thousands of fragmented smallholders into a single, cohesive, bankable project. They solve the scale problem right up front.
Which makes the government's role less about execution and more about, regulation and building infrastructure.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the government's critical function is to establish a streamlined, low-cost national framework for measurement, reporting, and verification. MRV.
MRV. And that's where the real technical complexity and the cost comes in, right?
It is. It's the foundation of trust for the entire global market. MRV involves initial baseline soil sampling, continuous measurement using remote sensing and satellite imagery, maybe using blockchain ledgers for immutable transaction records.
So it's expensive to build.
It's expensive, but it's essential for verifying the commodity. And most importantly, the government must provide the legal clarity that the farmer who sequesters the carbon owns the resulting credit.
That policy certainty seems to be the single biggest catalyst needed to unlock private investment.
It's everything.
So let's turn to the strategic outlook. The analysis is pretty blunt here. The main obstacle isn't technology, and it's not a lack of willing farmers. It's policy inertia.
The current setup, where the government heavily subsidizes chemical fertilizers, creates a direct financial disincentive against regenerative methods. We are, quite literally, paying farmers to degrade their most critical long-term asset.
And we face 3 distinct strategic paths in the next, say, 24 to 36 months.
3 paths, yes.
Scenario 1 is the inertia trajectory. The status quo prevails. Subsidies are maintained, probably due to political expediency, a fear of backlash from farmers.
And the result of that path is just a continued slow-motion hollowing out of the rural economy. Soil health keeps declining, yields stagnate even with more inputs, and our vulnerability to climate shocks just gets worse every single year.
It's the path of least resistance.
And it leads to a permanent state of expensive food insecurity.
Okay, scenario 2 is the fragmented private sector push. The government stays passive, but high-value private actors, coffee exporters, tea estates, agri-tech startups, they accelerate their efforts.
If that happens, you'll see these pockets of highly successful regenerative supply chains emerge. They'll prove the economic model works, create resilient microeconomies, especially in high-value cash crops.
Got it.
But the vast majority of staple crop farmers, the foundation of national food security, they get left behind. They're trapped in the old degrading subsidy model. The result is a deeply unequal two-tiered agricultural system. It fails to achieve national food sovereignty.
And finally, scenario 3, the strategic national alignment. This is the one that demands courageous policy leadership.
This is the rewarding path, but it's the hardest. It requires a real commitment to a phased 5-year plan to transition the entire budget,
Moving from what to what?
moving from a blanket NPK fertilizer subsidy to a soil health performance payment. So instead of paying for inputs that degrade the soil, the government pays farmers directly for verified outcomes, for measurable improvements in soil organic matter.
That one strategic shift would realign every single financial incentive in the system.
It would. It pays the farmer for being a climate steward and for being an asset builder.
And it would force the government to establish that low-cost national standard for soil carbon verification we talked about.
And that infrastructure is essential not just for government payments, but for unleashing the private investment needed to build the carbon aggregation platforms and the farmer training networks.
So what does this all mean? The policy shift really demands leadership that's willing to trade that short-term populist appeal. Handing out a bag of subsidized urea.
For long-term national strategic security, which is inherently tied to having resilient regenerative soil.
So regenerative agriculture is the key. It's the key to economic sovereignty, to reducing import dependency, and to building climate resilience from the ground up.
The revolution beneath Nepal's feet is ready to scale the moment that institutional framework is set, which brings us to the final thought. If the government clarifies unequivocally that the farmer who sequesters the carbon legally owns the credit, what kind of private sector investment, we're talking tens of millions of dollars, should investors expect will be necessary to build that national MRV infrastructure to actually support this new global commodity market? That massive yet necessary capital injection is the true challenge just waiting for policy action.